Hello and welcome to our interview series about leadership in movies. I'm David Anderson, and with me today is my daughter.
Hi, my name is Natalie Anderson.
And we're discussing the leadership in the movie Ford versus Ferrari, the movie known in Europe as Le Mans '66.
Ford vs. Ferrari follows Carroll Shelby, a retired racer turned car salesman, and Ken Biles, a mechanic and fearless racer, as they work with the struggling Ford Motors to engineer a race-winning car in the 1960s. As Ford begins to enter various races against racing powerhouse Ferrari, they are able to prove their own, and 3 of their cars go on to win the Le Mans International Racing Competition.
What about Carroll Shelby makes him an effective leader?
So I think we should share just a little background first, right? So Le Mans '66 is the year that Ford won the Le Mans race in France. And it was the first time that they had entered race cars at that level of racing anywhere in the world. They had entered the previous year, they didn't win. And then '66 is the year when they won with a car called the GT40, and they won 4 years in a row. So that year and 3 more years. And it really represented a pivotal point in the history of the Ford Motor Company. So Carroll Shelby, he was a former race driver and a race car designer and constructor. And Ford hired him to lead the race team so that they could win Le Mans. That was the purpose. And what makes him an effective leader, first of all, he's a very charismatic character. He's also won Le Mans as a driver. He was the only American to have done that. And so he has confidence, right? He has experience, he has charisma. He's very inspiring for a lot of the people who work for him. And he also shows them a lot of loyalty. He's very good at protecting them from all the politics that was involved in working with Ford. And he gets them what they need to be successful. So his main effectiveness is this experience, the confidence, the charisma, his ability to protect his people, and his ability to act in their service and get them everything they need to be successful, including at times getting all the Ford executives out of the way.
Lee Iacocca is seen remaking the value system at Ford. What do you think this is accomplishing?
So Lee Iacocca became really an iconic person in the North American automotive industry. Later in his career, he became the chief executive and the chairman at Chrysler, and he really remade Chrysler as a business. But at this point, it's earlier in his career, and he's working in marketing for Ford. And he's the one who sees the generational change that's happening with the young people who were born after the war, the baby boomer generation. And he realizes that they need what will make them buy and desire a certain car with a certain brand is it needs to have a certain sex appeal. We see him trying to raise awareness of this, because Ford historically had been about democratization. The original Ford Model T, or the very early, I guess the first one was the Model A. The whole concept was to make cheap, affordable cars for the mass market, for people who lived in the suburbs. In fact, the ability to own a car like that enabled them to live in the suburbs and drive to work, drive everywhere in their car. So Ford had created that sort of version of the American dream from the first half of the 20th century. And now Iacocca was coming along and saying, well, that's great, but if we want people to buy essentially our dull, boring suburban cars, We actually need to have some glamour associated with the brand. And I don't think they'd ever thought like that before. So he was really pushing for his boss, Henry Ford II, to think differently and to reimagine the Ford brand and what it could mean.
What leadership style do you think that Henry Ford exemplifies?
It's quite interesting, the leadership. We see this scene where he walks into the factory with a number of the executives and he gets them to shut the factory down. And I assume it must have been close to the end of the shift for that day. And he gets all the workers to pay attention, and his main complaint is that their sales have been dropping, and we learn in a different scene that the sales have been falling for 3 years running. And they're losing market share to Chevrolet, and particularly the model called the Impala. So Henry Ford wants the workforce to come up with some ideas. How can they innovate and sort of rekindle the brand and the desire of Americans to buy Ford cars? What is it they're missing that Chevrolet are doing? So he gives this inspiring speech where he talks about his grandfather who worked for Edison, and he's walking home thinking about life in general, and he comes up with a good idea. So he tells all the workers they need to walk home, come up with a good idea. If you come to my office with a good idea, well, you keep your job. And the rest of you, if you can't come up with any good ideas, maybe you shouldn't come to work, right? It's a bit harsh. But what I see with Henry Ford II is he's a good, solid leader who isn't going to mess up the business he inherited. At the same time, that whole business has got quite conservative, and he doesn't really feel like the guy who can shake it up. So if we were looking at our leadership maturity model, he's probably a solid level 4, but he's not going to take them to the highest level of performance, and he's not really capable, at least at the beginning of the movie, of reinventing the company. It takes an external action to provoke him into reinventing the company, and that external action is that Enzo Ferrari insults him. And then he gets very emotional about being insulted and decides to do something about it. But he wouldn't have done it on his own.
Finally, why do you teach this film to your students?
It was actually one of my students who was taking our change leadership class and watching other movies who suggested, at the time it was a brand new movie, and I guess he'd been watching it maybe at the cinema or on an airplane, and he suggested that I should take a look at it. And it has so many elements of the models that we teach to help people understand leadership and learn how to develop it. And we see leadership from a number of different characters, mainly Carroll Shelby and Lee Iacocca, Henry Ford II, several of the other characters have little bits of leadership, and in different styles and different ways. There's just so much variety in it, and it helps illustrate so much of the theory that we teach in class that it's really very powerful. In our leadership development class, it's why I have this one as the final movie, because it integrates so many of the concepts that we've learned through the other 11.
If you're interested in learning more about our leadership and management classes, please visit djaa.com for more information.